Now, invariably, when you're reading a chord sequence, whether it be a jazz standard or a piece of pop music or whatever it happens to be, you'll come across chords you think, what does that mean? Things like alt or plus or org. What's all that about? Well, I'm going to explain a few of them now. This list, of course, is not exhaustive, and if there's a chord that you would like to know, just put it in the comment box below and I'll send it back as either left and right hand notes, or if you're a guitarist, I can send it back in tablature form. So, let's get started. Alt. What does that mean? 7 alt is what you're more likely to see. It means altered. So that needs a little bit of explaining. This is the chord of C7 alt. It's a version of it. There's another one. Now, what this is designed to do is to be a nice fluid dominant chord. Where it resolves onto a chord 1, whether it be major or minor. Now, it's all to do with altering the extensions of your chord. Now, C7 can have these extensions. So you've got C, E and G, which is your C chord, then your 7th, which is B flat, then the 9th, which is D, sharp 11 is F sharp, and 13 is A. Now, generally speaking, you wouldn't use all of those unless it's a big band ending chord where you've got the trumpets going hell for leather up, up there in a C7 chord. However, with an altered chord, what you do is you alter the extensions to whatever you'd like, really. And actually, the extensions that you can alter are the 9th, which you can flatten or sharpen, both, and the 13th, which you flatten. Now, if you can't raise the 13th, because then it becomes the 7th. So the 13th of C is A. If I raise it, I get a B flat. So it's actually the same note as my 7th. So the 13th is flattened. So in this case, I've got C7. I had my G in there. I'll talk about that in a minute. Now, I've got the C7 chord, flat 13, where that was the 13th, and I've also got the sharpened 9th. So I've got a D sharp in there. I could have the D flat, I could have the flattened 9th. I mean, I could add both the 9ths there, the flattened and the sharpened one. But the fact is they are altered from their original forms. Now the G. Now just mention the G here. In one of my other videos when I was talking about chords and voicings and reducing the number of notes, I don't need that G there. Now if I press this key down so softly that the string doesn't move, there we go, the string is now open inside the piano. If I tap the C down here, you could hear that string moved. That means I don't need to add the 5th because it's inherent in this. We also get the conflict of the minor 9th interval between that G and my flat 13. So actually, I don't need to add that G at all, and it's better if it's not there. So also, with the altered chord, if I was to divide the work up so I have my left hand C and B flat, then I've got my sharpened 9th, 3rd, flat 13 and root. What I've got here is an A flat major chord at the top, so you could start making up shortcuts. So C7 with an A flat chord above it. That means that if you go down a major third from it, so G alt, for example, would be this. You'd have an E flat chord over your G7. Now that is also, you might see that on a page. If somebody's not familiar with alt chords, they might say, oh, it's E flat G7, for example. So there are lots of different ways of writing that stuff, and it may be written literally as well. G7 flat 9 flat 13, that's an altered chord. G7 sharp 9 flat 13, that's an altered chord. So there are lots of different ways of notating this, but alt basically is like the shorthand version. Okay, so moving on, we've got the augmented chord. What does that mean? Somebody goes, oh yeah, it's a demented this or whatever. Now, I think the classic example is this. Riding along in my automobile, my baby beside me. So it's a dominant chord again. So we had a D major, but augmented means to raise the fifth of D, or whichever chord it is. So in D, the fifth is A, so you just raise it to an A sharp. It kind of performs a very similar operation to the dominant seventh. If I do D7 to G, I have the seventh in D to the third in G. Whereas if I have a D augmented chord, it's a similar thing where you get that semitonal shift. In fact, it's two there, so it's quite a strong tie between the dominant chord and the root chord. So, augmented can be also notated as a plus symbol, G plus. G plus 5 doesn't mean G with an added fifth, it means G with a sharpened fifth. Or you can have the sharp symbol. So there are, again, unfortunately, some different things showing there. Now, the thing about an augmented chord is it's also made up of major third intervals. So, we know another basically chord shape where you have equidistant notes, and that's the diminished one, which is minor thirds. Augmented is major thirds. It's another good way of modulating, that is, going to another key perhaps. So, sometimes you'll also see a chord that says something over something else. I mentioned that just now, the sort of erroneous way of writing a 7/alt chord, but sometimes you have D over C. So, the D chord, D major, D over C. Now that is used to essentially say where the bass line's going, because I could go D over C, G over B. G minor over B flat or B flat 6. There's lots and lots of different ways of notating this, and some are more correct than others because of the harmonic progression that they imply. Now you can also have things called pedals, and I'm going to go on to the sus flat 9 chord now. So sus flat 9 I had a C for every single chord there. It's a really nice way of tying chords together is to have the same bass note. Of course, you've got to be careful. There are combinations that won't work, but the sus flat 9 means you've got a C, you've got a C sus 4, but you take your root here and make it into a flat 9th, which is a D flat instead. Etc. Sometimes you see that sus flat 9, what does it mean there's a 7th? Well, it could do. You could have a sus flat 9 with your 7th added, and actually it does gel it together a bit more. Now, that's the last chord I'm going to talk about. 7, flat 5, flat 9. Really? But sometimes the more complicated the chord, the easier it is to actually construct it, because it's kind of telling you what to do. C7, flat 5, flat 9. It's simply saying take those notes and, you know, bring them down by a semitone. So, for example, C7, if I have something like that, flat 5, that's the G, going down to a G flat. So there we go, that's the first one. And then flat 9. Now this is kind of nice, because you can think of this as C7 in your left hand, with the tritone, that is 3 tones away from C, which is an F sharp chord, or G flat, and just putting that, it's a major chord. If you listen to sort of, you know, there's a fantastic Money Jungle album from G. Cunnington, that trio. It's fantastic. You've got this sort of, the ending, you know, you've got this. So you've got your B flat 7, and then you've got your flat 9, which is a B, and the flat 5, which is an E. So there's some really quite tasty things there. Now, lastly, I love the maths of music. I think it's a fascinating subject, but I don't get lost in it because it's about these. If you don't use these, it doesn't mean anything. It's like giving a speech. I don't know. It's like saying big long words in a monotone. You know, it's much better to deliver a speech with simpler words, but with pitch, with some sort of inflection. And that's what music is. Now this thing here, this is the sort of Chordosaurus Scalosaurus Rex. Now, I just got busy with a Stanley knife, as you can see here, with lots of notes, and I've got all sorts of different scales and chord types and that sort of thing. Luckily, for the rest of the world, this doesn't scan on an A4 printer. It needs an A3 because it's actually a 12-inch record size. So yes, don't worry. I shan't be firing this anywhere anytime soon. But essentially it gives you chords and the scale that goes with it. But really, if you get into that sort of where you're trying to find a specific scale for a specific chord, there are plenty of places on the internet where you can just get the information that you need. And then the best thing to do is just to sit there, play through it and try and analyse what's going on, and analyse essentially what chord might lead to another chord, or might be able to give you a modulation to another key. And that's the function of lots of these chords.